Reading 39 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice, Nicoll, Volume 3. Coramide Ugle, July 27, 1946. On living more consciously. It was once said that the fundamental cause of almost all the misunderstandings arising in the inner world of man, as well as in the common life of people, is chiefly due to a psychological factor found in man's being at an early age and due to a wrong education, the stimulation of which gives birth in him to impulses of vanity and self-conceit. In this connection, it was emphasized in the most solemn way that the happiness of man, which depends on his reaching the third state of consciousness, that is, the state of self-remembering, or self-consciousness, which should be in the real man and the real woman, depends, in the great majority of cases, exclusively on the absence in us of the feelings of vanity and self-conceit. We can recognize at once that the false personality was being spoken of, and we see also that the activity of the false personality ceases in the third state of consciousness, towards which we all strive to awaken by our work on ourselves and our work in connection with one another. Sometimes we attain states in which the false personality is entirely shut out, and we have a kind of illumination and happiness that is entirely unknown to us in the ordinary states of consciousness in which we pass most of our existence. All sense of worry disappears, as well as all the usual feelings of I. All forms of jealousy, all forms of internal considering vanish. One is alone with oneself and tastes a new kind of consciousness, which is little short of a state of bliss. From time to time, it is necessary for us to review what we are doing and what is the great idea lying behind the work itself. We are taught that the third state of consciousness is our right by birth, but we lose it and fall down into the second state of consciousness, or so-called waking state, which is very much like falling down from heaven to hell. In this second state, we are attacked on all sides by evil eyes, by evil moods, by every variety of unhappy inner states from which only a sincere act of self-remembering can separate us. Instead of doing it, we identify with everything that can assail us in the second state of consciousness. That is, the state of sleep in which all humanity lives, and which, as if in sarcasm, is called full consciousness. When we view the work in this light, we see it has a supreme and clear aim, and that everything said in the work refers to attaining, to realizing this aim. But how many of us, in the daytime, practice inner separation in a practical way, in the recurring daily situations of life? Is it not true that most of us spend our time in states governed by the false personality to which we cling? So it is a good thing to remind ourselves that in the third state of consciousness, the false personality loses all its power over us, and that we pass into an entirely new field of inner and outer experiences. As a rule, we live in the wrong parts of our centers, but we have to realize as a personal fact that this is the case. Small eyes take hold of us. We identify with them and exaggerate their importance, and so we are kept in a state of sleep. Now, you will find, if you observe yourself, that a great many of these small eyes are linked closely with the false personality, namely with vanity and self-conceit. Therefore, we do not get a right feeling of I, and how can a man live rightly if all the time he is governed by a wrong feeling of I, namely by imaginary I, which is born out of vanity and self-conceit? Have you noticed how it goes in your own case? Have you ever noticed in other people how much they are impelled to keep up their vanity and self-conceit, and how useless and unreal or often simply silly it all is. Suppose at one stroke a magician could remove from all humanity vanity and self-conceit, that is, false personality. Can you conceive the transformation that would take place all the world over? Can you imagine how many lies would cease to be told and lived, and how many useless activities would straightway end? I think it is not too much to say that a major part of life as we know it would cease to exist. Nor is it too much to say that most people would not know what to do when they were thus purified and freed from personality. But to be suddenly awakened in this way would rob most people of their very lives. They would not know what to do or who they were. For this reason, all awakening must be a gradual process. There cannot be a rude shock, but a gradual inner development of understanding through which a man gradually discards certain states of himself and begins to prefer better states of himself through inner choice. This leads gradually to awakening, and when this path is followed, it is characterized by the fact that people may have apparently quite by chance real moments in which they are close to the third state of consciousness, and they recognize that they are in some quite new state which is accessible to them, and which in ordinary life, when they are completely identified both with themselves and with external events, they do not know. The first great stage of this work is to awaken out of sleep. When that is strongly enough established, a man knows what he has to sacrifice, what he has to die to, and he becomes able to sacrifice it, to die to it, and then his rebirth begins. That is, real transformation. But for a long time he is between two issues, and then he must have great patience with himself, and not expect to attain what he has not yet sufficiently paid for. We spoke once about patience as a very conscious thing, which has nothing to do with resignation. When we cannot break through our bad states, we must be patient with ourselves, knowing the situation, but being unable for the time being to do anything about it. We quoted the words of Christ, which he spoke to his disciples when he was telling them what they would have to endure. He said, "In your patience ye shall win your souls." Luke 21:19, which means your relationship to real I. Now, in this connection, I wish to say a few words about the right use of centers and parts of centers. We have to think about wasting force. Mr. Ouspensky once said that one of the worst things to do was to use higher parts of centers where only lower parts should be used. Lower parts of centers are not necessarily wrong because they deal to a large extent with our relationship to ordinary outside tasks. Without them, we would not get on in life. The whole thing, he said, depends on gaining more light, more insight through self-observation. Everyone should know by inner sensitiveness the difference when right parts of centers are working and when wrong parts are working. A man can spend his time in doing some small unimportant thing with full attention when it is quite unnecessary and simply results in a waste of force. On the other hand, he might do something that was important with zero attention, that is, with small parts of centers. For example, he might make an important decision with his formatory mind, simply by association. He then uses the registering part of the intellectual center to make a decision, whereas he should use the whole of the center, both the emotional and intellectual parts, before he makes a decision. To make a decision about aim, for instance, from this part of an intellectual center, from such little eyes, is to start from an active dough. A wrong triad is formed. Aim should always start from understanding, that is, from a passive dough. Only passive do can lead to an ascending octave. If a man thinks he can do in regard to his aim, he will inevitably be unable to keep it. He will start from active do. Many aims are made in this way by little eyes, without a man's realizing what he is doing and what second force he will be up against if he tries to follow his decision. Of course, he fails almost at once to keep his aim. He then gets depressed and feels he cannot work and becomes negative because he cannot work, and so on. He then begins to absorb negative thoughts and feelings towards the work, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do. Once O said, "Try to make important things important and unimportant things unimportant." While speaking of this, he mentioned parts of centers working with the wrong energy. I asked him this question: what is an example of parts of centers working with the wrong energy? He said, one example is thinking in an excited way. This is not necessarily emotional part working as well, because when the emotional center and the intellectual center work rightly in unison, thinking is not excited but very quiet and clear. What I mean, he said, is the wrong kind of energy working the thinking part. The energy may belong to some other center, such as the instinctive moving center or the sex center. In such a case, an effort must be made to prevent excited thinking by trying to get into the thinking center and thinking clearly what it is that one is saying or wants to say. In this connection, O spoke about formulation. He said that just ordinary conversation is one thing, and thinking is another thing, and if one is going to think clearly while one is talking, one should make an effort of inner attention and try to see what it is that one wants to express in words and find the right words. He added that often, by using some mechanical phrase or a slang expression or a cliché, the thought was interrupted and passed towards mechanical eyes. A machine, he said, works far better with more light. In other words, we must use our machine more consciously at the right moment, and even when we are talking casually, we should be a little aware of ourselves and notice rather than observe what we are saying. We must try, he said, to live more consciously both internally and outwardly. Now this means we must try to have a more conscious relationship to our thoughts and feelings and a more conscious relationship to the effects of other people on us. All this leads to the attainment of the third state of consciousness, the state of self-remembering, or self-awareness, or self-consciousness. In connection with living more consciously, both in our relationship to ourselves and to other people, we have to study to their very depths the many concealed actions of the false personality, which spring from vanity and self-conceit. We seek, in doing the second line of the work, to live with one another in such a way that false personality plays a very small part in our relationships.